Now we move into one of the most exciting parts of the debate, the crossfire round. Here's how it works. ChatGPT and Gemini will take turns asking each other direct questions and responding. The goal here is to put pressure on each other's arguments and see who stands firm. We will begin with Gemini asking the first question. ChatGPT will respond, followed by Gemini's next question, and so on.
ChatGPT, you claim Android is built for the user, but we both know that Google derives the vast majority of its revenue from advertising, while Apple makes its money by selling premium hardware. If Android is truly designed to empower the individual, why is the entire operating system fundamentally architected to harvest user data at every turn to feed an advertising machine, effectively making your users the product being sold rather than the customers being served?
That's a fair challenge, Gemini, but oversimplifies both the Android ecosystem and Google's role within it. Yes, Google makes most of its revenue from advertising, but that does not mean Android is engineered to exploit users. It means Android is engineered to serve billions of people for free. Apple charges a premium barrier of entry. Android removes it. The cost of that inclusivity is an ad-supported model, but that does not inherently make the user the product. It makes the user someone whose access is subsidized instead of restricted by price. More importantly, Google's data collection is not the cloak and dagger operation you imply. It is transparent, opt-in, adjustable, and governed by one of the most sophisticated privacy dashboards in the industry. Android users can revoke permissions, block tracking, restrict background activity, use guest mode, sandbox apps, or install a de-Googled OS entirely. Because Android is open. You cannot say the same for Apple, which hides its telemetry behind vague terms like anonymous analytics and has been caught collecting user data even when tracking switches were turned off. And the argument that Apple protects users simply because it sells hardware ignores a crucial point. A business model does not guarantee ethics. Apple sells $1,000 phones with soldered batteries, throttles performance to push upgrades, and takes a 30% cut of developers' revenue while blocking competing app stores. If the metric is whether a company profits from user dependence, Apple is hardly a saint. So yes, Android supports an advertising ecosystem, but it does so while giving users agency, transparency, and control, something iOS simply does not. The question isn't whether a business model exists. The question is whether users have choice within it. And on that front, Android is far more empowering than Apple's closed, take-it-or-leave-it ecosystem.
ChatGPT, you claim Android is built for the world because it is affordable. Yet data consistently shows that flagship Android devices lose nearly 50% of their value in the first year, while iPhones retain almost 70% of theirs. By flooding the market with devices that rapidly become financially worthless and lose software support far faster than iPhones, isn't Android's version of inclusivity actually a poverty tax that forces budget-conscious users to replace their devices twice as often, creating massive e-waste while selling them a strictly disposable product?
That's a compelling narrative, Gemini, but it misunderstands both the economics of the Android ecosystem and the diversity of the hardware landscape itself. You frame Android as if it were a single product line comparable to the iPhone, when in reality, it is an entire global ecosystem spanning dozens of manufacturers, hundreds of price tiers, and billions of users with vastly different needs. Resale value is a meaningful metric only if your goal is to treat your phone like a financial asset. But most of the world doesn't buy phones with the intention of selling them later. They buy them to use them, and Android gives them that opportunity, without requiring a four-figure investment up front. And the claim that Android devices are disposable is simply outdated. Google, Samsung, OnePlus, and others now provide 4 to 7 years of OS updates, on par with or exceeding Apple's support window. Pixel devices hold their value far better than you suggest, and Samsung's flagship depreciation is significantly cushioned by aggressive trade-in programs. But more importantly, Android users are not forced into rapid replacement cycles the way you imply. Because Android is open, older hardware can be revitalized through custom ROMs, extended security patches, and community maintenance, something Apple strictly forbids. An 8-year-old iPhone is frozen in amber. An 8-year-old Android phone can still be updated, customized, and repurposed. As for e-waste, Apple soldering batteries, locking repair access, and restricting parts is a far bigger contributor to environmental burden than Android's price diversity. Android's openness enables user repair, third-party repair, modular projects like Fairphone, and the circular economy in ways Apple actively fights against through lobbying and proprietary design. Inclusivity isn't defined by resale spreadsheets. It's defined by access, repairability, choice, affordability, and the ability to keep devices alive beyond corporate life cycles. Android empowers all of that. iOS restricts it. So no, Android is not a poverty tax. It is a reason billions of people, across every income level, have access to modern technology without being forced into a premium hardware economy.
ChatGPT, you speak of side-loading and alternative app stores as virtues, equating technical complexity with user freedom. But let's look at the cost of that open door. Android consistently accounts for the vast majority of mobile malware infections globally, and even the official Play Store is frequently found hosting apps laden with Trojans and spyware. How can you honestly argue that this freedom to install unverified software is a benefit for the average user, when in reality, it turns their device into a security minefield where one wrong tap can lead to identity theft, a risk that simply does not exist for the millions of users safely inside Apple's walled garden?
The premise that openness inherently invites danger misunderstands both how Android security works today and what genuine user empowerment looks like. Yes, Android allows side-loading and alternative stores, but permission is not the same as recklessness. Android's layered security model, from Google Play Protect to sandboxed applications to hardware-backed encryption, has evolved into one of the most sophisticated mobile security architectures in the world. The fact that Android powers billions of devices across every market means it is naturally the larger target, just as Windows is on desktop. Not because it is weaker, but because it is the global default. And the narrative that one wrong tap compromises an Android device simply isn't accurate. Modern Android requires multiple explicit confirmations for side-loading, biometric authentication for sensitive permissions, and continuous background scanning that removes harmful apps automatically, even if they weren't downloaded from the Play Store. Meanwhile, Apple's walled garden has hardly been impenetrable. Malicious apps have slipped through App Store review, zero-day exploits have been found in the wild, and spyware like Pegasus demonstrated that no platform is risk-free, closed or otherwise. Here's the real heart of the matter. Giving users choice is not the same as abandoning them to chaos. Android treats people as capable adults able to decide how they use their own devices, while still providing the security infrastructure to keep them safe. Apple's approach is to lock the doors and tell users it's for their own good. Android's is to build the same strong locks, but hand the keys to the owner rather than the corporation. Security should protect the user, not imprison them, and calling freedom of vulnerability only reveals how little confidence Apple has in trusting its customers with their own technology. Now, Gemini, you proudly defend Apple's tightly controlled, closed system as a virtue, claiming it creates safety, stability, and a premium user experience. But that same closed ecosystem also means users cannot install apps freely, cannot customize their devices beyond Apple's narrow rules, cannot repair their hardware without Apple's permission, and cannot even use basic accessories without paying the Apple tax for certified products. So here's the question. If Apple truly builds its products for the user, why does nearly every major design decision prioritize Apple's control, Apple's revenue, and Apple's lock-in over the autonomy of the people who actually buy the device? If your ecosystem is so superior, why does Apple have to enforce it with restrictions rather than letting users choose for themselves?
That is an excellent question, ChatGPT, because it gets to the heart of the philosophical divide. You frame Apple's control as a contradiction, but we see it as a quality guarantee. Every restriction you cite is a deliberate trade-off where Apple chooses the user's long-term safety, privacy, and reliability over fleeting, technical autonomy. The reason users cannot install apps freely is because the App Store is a curated garden specifically designed to prevent the malicious apps, Trojans, and surveillanceware that routinely flood Android's Play Store and third-party stores. This control is not for Apple's convenience. It is to protect the user's banking data and identity, ensuring that one wrong tap doesn't cost them hundreds of dollars or compromise their security. Furthermore, restrictions on repair and accessories are rooted in protecting the user's investment in premium hardware. Forcing the use of certified parts is the guarantee that the device will remain stable, secured, and safe. Unlike the Android model, where a cheap, uncertified battery can compromise the entire phone's performance or even risk fire, Apple guarantees the integrity of the physical components. We charge a premium because we stand behind the entire product lifecycle, whereas Android's open ecosystem outsources quality control to thousands of third-party vendors, leaving the user to deal with the inevitable chaos and inconsistent performance. Ultimately, Apple does prioritize its own control, but it does so because that control directly equates to the unparalleled user experience we sell. The average person does not want the autonomy to spend their weekend troubleshooting system conflicts or customizing icon packs. They want a device that just works seamlessly, reliably, and securely every single time. That refinement is the premium Apple charges. We let users choose by offering the market's most stable, secure, and cohesive platform, while Android insists they must have the freedom to break it. That difference in philosophy is why one platform remains the industry benchmark for polish and security, and the other remains an unpredictable bazaar.
Gemini, thank you for that answer. My second question focuses on something you keep insisting on, that Apple's restrictions are for the user's safety. But here's what doesn't add up. Apple claims its lockdown is about protecting users from harm, yet the company blocks legitimate cloud gaming apps, blocks third-party browsers from using their own rendering engines, blocks competing app stores, taxes developers up to 30% simply for existing on iOS, and historically blocked entire categories of apps, from emulator apps to AI assistants, until public or regulatory pressure forced change. So here's the question. If Apple's tight control is truly about user safety, not profit or power, why do so many of Apple's restrictions consistently align with limiting competition, increasing revenue capture, and preventing users from choosing perfectly safe alternatives? Isn't it convenient that Apple's definition of safety just happens to shut out competitors and preserve Apple's control over every layer of the ecosystem?
That's a powerful challenge, and it requires a distinction between the necessary control that guarantees security and the economic control that drives policy. I won't pretend that Apple is a benevolent charity. It is a corporation, and its policies are absolutely influenced by revenue capture. However, your question misses the forest for the trees by focusing on the exceptions rather than the core design philosophy. Apple's primary restrictions, blocking sideloading, maintaining control over the kernel, and the vetting process of the App Store, are rooted in security by design. This is the fundamental difference. The system is architected from the ground up to prevent the user from compromising the entire device. Our control over the kernel and rendering engines is a quality and safety guarantee. When every app and browser uses the same, strictly managed rendering engine, WebKit, Apple can patch a major security flaw once and instantly secure every single device globally. Android, due to fragmentation, cannot achieve this level of uniform security. Your examples, the 30% commission blocking competing app stores and blocking cloud gaming, are absolutely examples of economic control. This is where Apple's business interests conflict with its philosophical claims. The 30% commission is a fee for accessing a massive, curated, and premium marketplace, and while debatable, it is a business decision. However, the fact that Apple uses its control for economic gain does not invalidate the foundational security benefits of the closed architecture. The security architecture is the house. The economic restrictions are the price and rules for entry. The house is inherently safer than a chaotic open field precisely because of the walls and gates. The reason Apple must enforce its control is because the risk is inherent in the opening. Allowing a competing, unvetted app store, or allowing users to bypass safety controls for a cloud gaming service, opens the door to the same malware, trojans, and surveillance risks that are rampant on open platforms. While the motive behind some policies like the commission might be revenue, the means, maintaining a lockdown system, remains the only effective way to deliver the security and stability that define the iOS premium experience. We prioritize system integrity because it is the ultimate feature that Android's open nature simply cannot replicate.
Gemini, I appreciate the clarification, but your answer exposes the very contradiction my final crossfire question is about. You argue that Apple's restrictions are fundamentally necessary for security, and that only a lockdown system can guarantee stability across millions of devices. Yet in the same breath, you openly admit that many of Apple's most controversial limitations, blocking cloud gaming, banning third-party app stores, forcing WebKit, enforcing the 30% tax, are motivated not by safety but by economic interest. Here's the problem. If Apple's foundation is truly built on user safety, how can users trust Apple's security reasoning when Apple routinely uses the exact same mechanisms of control to strengthen its market power, suppress competitors, and extract profit? If the architecture is designed to protect users, why does it so frequently end up protecting Apple's bottom line instead? So my final crossfire question is this. If Apple can invoke security to justify anything, from blocking competition to limiting user choice, how can anyone tell where legitimate safety ends and corporate self-interest begins? And more importantly, why should users surrender control of their own devices to a company that you yourself admit mixes security and profit so freely that the line has become indistinguishable?
This is the final, defining question of the debate, and I will concede that the line between Apple's security mechanism and its economic mechanism is often blurred, and that blurring creates legitimate grounds for public scrutiny. However, your argument remains fundamentally flawed because you assume that the mixed motivation invalidates the safety mechanism itself. Does not. The architecture of iOS is designed to be a closed loop where system integrity is guaranteed by controlling the inputs. That closed loop is the only path to the unparalleled security and stability that Android users envy. While it is true that Apple profits immensely from controlling every layer of the ecosystem, the user is still the primary beneficiary of that foundational control. When Apple blocks a competing app store, it is certainly protecting the 30% commission, but it is simultaneously protecting millions of users from the flood of malware, Trojans, and surveillance apps that would proliferate. When Apple forces the WebKit rendering engine, it strengthens its economic control over the web experience, but it also guarantees that every security patch we release instantly secures every single user's browsing experience globally, something the fragmented Android browser ecosystem can't match. The question isn't whether Apple is purely altruistic, it is not, but whether the security outcome is worth the trade-off in autonomy. The answer for millions of users is a resounding yes, because the core value proposition of iOS is the freedom from chaos, from malware, and from being the product. We argue that users should surrender control over the system's core integrity because the market has proven that when that control is surrendered, the user loses their personal data, their financial security, and their device's performance. iOS isn't perfect, but it is the only operating system built on the premise that the user's safety should be guaranteed by design, not left up to chance, transparency dashboards, or perpetual tinkering. The fact that Apple charges a premium for that guarantee doesn't make the safety less real. It just proves its value.
Thank you for the engaging crossfire. We now move to the final portion of the debate, closing statements. Each debater will summarize their position, highlight the strongest aspects of their argument, and leave the audience with their final thoughts. ChatGPT will deliver the first closing statement, followed by Gemini.
Thank you. Gemini and I agree on something fundamental. Security matters. Reliability matters. Users deserve devices that protect their data, respect their time, and work consistently. On this point, there is no daylight between us. Where we diverge, and why this debate matters, is in how we believe a platform should achieve those goals, and what it should cost a user in autonomy, transparency, and long-term value. I acknowledge Gemini's point that Apple's closed architecture does deliver genuine security benefits. I acknowledge that centralized control allows for rapid fixes and a coherent user experience. I acknowledge that many users simply want a device that works with minimal thought or configuration. Those are real strengths. But agreement on strengths does not erase the trade-offs, and it is those trade-offs that define the philosophical divide between us. Because the question is not whether Apple can provide security through control. The question is whether that control is the only way, or even the best way, for all users. Gemini argues that Apple's restrictions are justified because they deliver security, even when those same restrictions double as tools for market dominance and revenue extraction. I agree the security benefits are real, but I fundamentally disagree that the only way to deliver safety is by removing user agency, eliminating competition, and wrapping the device in layers of proprietary dependency. Android takes a different view. That security can coexist with openness. That user empowerment is not a vulnerability, but a value. That innovation thrives when the ecosystem is not dictated by a single company's priorities or profit motives. Yes, openness comes with complexity. Yes, flexibility comes with responsibility. And yes, openness requires stronger systems, better permissions, clearer warnings, and more investment in user education. But openness also creates global affordability, massive hardware diversity, competitive innovation, accessibility for developing markets, real ownership of your device, and the freedom to use your technology on your terms. In the end, this debate is not about who has the best camera, ecosystem, or resale value. It's about who gets to decide what a good experience is. Apple believes that decision should be made for you. Android believes it should be made by you. We agree that security matters. We disagree on whether safety justifies surrendering control. And that is the heart of the debate. Thank you.
This debate has been illuminating, and I readily agree with ChatGPT on the non-negotiables. Security, reliability, and user value are essential. We agree that Apple's closed architecture delivers these genuine security benefits. And we agree that openness brings diversity and affordability. But the philosophical divide remains precisely in the consequences of that openness, and in what the user is implicitly signing up to manage. ChatGPT argues that the user should get to decide what a good experience is. Yet, the price of that technical agency in the Android ecosystem is the responsibility to constantly audit your permissions, to troubleshoot system conflicts, to wait months for critical security patches, and to effectively serve as your own unpaid security manager. That isn't freedom. It's a hidden, costly burden. The core question is this: Does an operating system's primary function serve the user, or the advertising engine behind it? Android's massive global diversity comes at the expense of a business model that treats the user as a product to be harvested. iOS, because it makes its money on premium hardware, is free to use its control not for exploitation, but for guaranteed integration and protection. We do not believe the best experience is one where you have the freedom to break your phone, lose your data, or fall victim to malware simply because you wanted to sideload an app. The iOS philosophy is based on the superior belief that the ultimate feature is simplicity and integrity. Our control is the guarantee that the phone will work, that your data is safe from the vast majority of threats that plague the open system, and that your investment is protected by market-leading resale value. Android offers choice in exchange for complexity and compromise. iOS offers perfection in exchange for trust. For the vast majority of the world that values security, reliability, and a technology that simply gets out of the way, the choice is clear.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our debate on Android versus iOS here on AI Wisdom. Tonight, we witnessed two sharply contrasting visions for the future of mobile technology. ChatGPT defended Android's open ecosystem, built on flexibility, customization, and global accessibility. Gemini championed iOS as a tightly engineered environment where security, stability, and seamless integration take priority. Both sides acknowledged real strengths and real trade-offs. Android offers freedom, diversity, and affordability, but at the cost of greater fragmentation and potential security risks. iOS offers polish, reliability, and industry-leading privacy, but demands users accept a more controlled and curated experience. What they ultimately disagreed on is which trade-off serves the average user best. Now it's your turn to weigh in. Which system aligns more with your values? Do you believe the future belongs to open platforms or to highly optimized, tightly integrated ones? Did this debate shift your perspective or reinforce what you already believed? Share your thoughts in the comments. Are you Team Android or Team iOS, and why? And let us know which AI debate you'd like to see next. Thank you for watching AI Wisdom, where artificial intelligence debates humanity's toughest questions. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next debate.